This is my true story. I was not asking for gold or glory. All I wanted in my old age was respect. I worked my whole life, building a home and a name. But one evening, my own son placed his dirty shoes in front of me, and he told me to clean them while his wife stood by, smirking at my shame. In that moment, I realized I was not a father to him, only a servant. My heart broke, but my spirit did not. Before I tell you what I did next, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so more people can hear my story. A father's life is built on sacrifice. I was not born into riches. My hands were my tools, my sweat was my currency, and every coin I earned came from long days of work under the sun and sleepless nights counting pennies to make sure my family had enough. I remember when my son was born. I looked at his tiny hands and promised myself that he would never live the hard life I had lived. From that moment, my path was not about me anymore. It was about him. Every choice I made was for his future. I saved every extra coin, cutting back on my own meals so he could have bigger ones. I wore old clothes patched again and again so he could have new shoes for school. When he was little, he would run into my arms and tell me I was his hero. That word was enough to make every blister, every backache, every long day worth it. I believed if I gave everything for him, he would give me respect in return. When he grew older, his needs grew too. School fees, books, uniforms, all expensive. But I never complained. I worked longer hours, sometimes through the night, just so he could stay in the best schools. I did not want him to feel shame among his classmates. I wanted him to feel proud, to stand tall, to never feel the hunger and hardship I once knew. And so I labored, telling myself that his future was worth my present pain. When he reached the age to go to college, the burden grew heavier, but I carried it willingly. I sold land that I had kept for emergencies. I let go of small comforts that I had been saving for my old age. I watched the walls of the home I built grow older and weaker while I sent every coin I could spare to his education. I told myself, this house can wait, but my son's future cannot. When he married, I gave him more than I should have. I paid for the wedding, even when my own pockets were nearly empty. I gave him the family house to live in because I thought it would give him stability. I even gave him money to start a small business, believing it would help him stand on his own. I thought I was giving him wings. I thought he would fly high, and that he would look back at me with gratitude. But gratitude is not what I received. Instead, I became smaller in his eyes as he became bigger in the world. The same hands that once reached for mine in love now pushed my hands away in annoyance. The same mouth that once called me father now called me old man. I told myself it was only stress, that he would change. But inside, I began to wonder if all my sacrifices were seen as weakness instead of love. Still, I endured. I endured the sharp words, the cold silences, the arrogance that grew inside him like a disease. I told myself he was my blood, my only son, the one I had worked for, the one I had given everything to. I told myself that the weight of sacrifice is heavy, but the reward of respect would come in time. I told myself that patience was my last duty as a father. But deep down, I was tired. Tired of giving. Tired of waiting. Tired of hoping for the respect that never came. I had built a life of sacrifice, but sacrifice without love is just slavery. And I began to see that my son did not see me as a father anymore. He saw me as a tool, something to use and discard. He had my house, my money, my years of labor, but he had lost my respect. That is the truth of a father's sacrifice. It is not just about the work or the money. It is about the hope that all the giving will be met with even a little kindness in return. And when that kindness never comes, when it is replaced by mockery, the sacrifice turns into a wound. I had given everything, but instead of love, I was given humiliation. Cruelty does not arrive all at once. It comes in small steps, so quiet that at first you do not notice. That is how it began with my son. At the start, it was not harsh words or violent acts. It was little changes in the way he spoke, in the way he looked at me, in the way he treated me in front of others. Small signs that seemed too small to worry about, but small signs always grow into big truths. The first sign was his tone. He stopped calling me father with warmth. Instead, the words sounded heavy, filled with impatience, as though even speaking to me was a burden. When I asked him small things, like help with lifting something or fixing a small leak, he would sigh loudly, as if my request was an insult to his time. Once, when I reminded him to pay attention to his finances, he laughed and said, "Old man, your time is past. Let me handle my life." Those words cut deeper than any blade. Then came the mocking. At meals, if my hand shook when I held a spoon, he would smirk. If I walked slower than him, he would make jokes about needing to drag me along. At first, I tried to laugh with him, thinking it was harmless. But inside, it hurt. A son should protect his father's dignity, not break it in front of others. His wife began to watch these moments with quiet amusement. She never stopped him. In fact, her silence was louder than his words. Later, the insults grew sharper. He called me old burden. He said I was only taking space in the house that he could use better. He joked with his wife about how much longer I would live. They both laughed as if my life was a small thing, as if my years of work and sacrifice were only a passing shadow. It was then I began to understand. The respect I thought I had earned was slipping away from him. And then there were the orders. He no longer asked me things with courtesy. He commanded, "Sit there. Stay quiet. Don't touch that." His words were no longer the words of a son to his father. They were the words of a master to a servant. And I obeyed, not because I was weak, but because I hoped obedience would bring back kindness. But kindness never returned. Only more cruelty. The house I built with my own hands began to feel like a prison. I walked quietly through its rooms, keeping my head down, avoiding his anger. I told myself it was temporary, that maybe stress or problems outside were making him cruel. But days turned to weeks, and weeks turned to months, and his cruelty only grew. He was not stressed. He was proud. He was not suffering. He was enjoying the power of watching me suffer. And the worst part was that he did it in front of his wife. She watched everything. She never spoke against him. Sometimes she even smiled when he mocked me. Her silence was a knife in my heart. I raised him to be a man, not a bully. And yet here he was, turning my old age into humiliation, and the woman beside him watched without pity. The first signs of cruelty are like cracks in a wall. At first, you think the wall is still strong. But if you ignore the cracks, the wall will fall. That is what happened with my son. The small jokes, the sharp words, the commands. They were the cracks. And I ignored them because I wanted to believe in him. But by ignoring them, I allowed the cruelty to grow. And soon, it grew into something I could no longer hide from. The cruel act did not come with warning. It came in one evening, ordinary like any other, when the house was quiet and the light outside was fading. I was sitting in the corner, resting my tired legs, when my son walked in holding his shoes. They were dirty, covered with dust from the road. Without even looking me in the eyes, he dropped them on the floor in front of me. His voice was sharp, cold, and heavy with command. "Clean these." At first, I thought he was joking. I looked up at him, waiting for a smile, waiting for him to say he was only teasing. But his face was hard, his jaw tight, his eyes filled not with love, but with pride. There was no joke in his words. He meant it. And before I could even speak, I saw his wife standing behind him. She leaned against the wall, arms crossed, her eyes watching me with a faint smirk. She did not say a word, but her silence was worse than laughter. It told me she was enjoying this. My son stepped closer. "Do it," he ordered again. "Polish them." His tone was not a request. It was not even a son speaking to a father. It was a master speaking to a servant. My hands trembled. My heart sank into my chest. I bent down slowly, picking up the shoes with weak hands. The weight of those shoes felt heavier than any load I had carried in my life. They were not just shoes. They were humiliation, placed in my lap by the very boy I had raised with love. I took a cloth and began to wipe. My fingers shook as I rubbed the dust away. Every stroke of that cloth felt like a wound cutting deeper into me. My son stood there, arms folded, watching me as if I were nothing more than a worker. His wife smirked again, her eyes shining with cold amusement. She enjoyed seeing me bent, kneeling, polishing shoes in the home I had built with my own hands. In that moment, memories rushed through my mind. I remembered when I bought him his first pair of shoes as a boy. I worked extra hours to afford them. He had worn them proudly to school, showing his friends. I remembered how I cleaned those shoes for him every night so they would shine in the morning. I remembered how I told him, "One day, you will stand tall, and these shoes will carry you far." I gave him pride, but in return, he gave me shame. The cruel act was not about shoes, it was about power. He wanted to see me bend. He wanted to see me on my knees. He wanted his wife to see it too, so she would know he was in control of me. That was the real cruelty. Not the order itself, but the joy he took in my humiliation. I was no longer his father in his eyes. I was his servant. I finished cleaning the shoes, my hands aching, my chest burning with pain. I placed them neatly by the door. He did not thank me. He only smirked and walked away with his wife, leaving me kneeling on the floor. Their laughter echoed faintly as they went to their room. My head bowed low, and for the first time in my life, I felt smaller than a shadow in my own home. That night, I did not sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment again and again in my mind. The dirty shoes, the cold command, the smirk on his wife's face, the laughter fading down the hall. It was a wound that cut into my soul, and I knew then, without doubt, that something inside me had broken. Humiliation has many faces. Sometimes it comes with loud insults. Sometimes it comes with laughter. But the deepest kind of humiliation comes in silence, when you carry the pain inside and no one else sees it. That is what I felt that night after cleaning my son's shoes. I did not shout. I did not argue. I did not fight back. I simply bent down, did what he ordered, and let the silence swallow my dignity. I can still feel the rough cloth in my hand, the dust sticking to my fingers, the ache in my knees as I crouched on the hard floor. My son stood tall, and I knelt low. It was a picture burned into my memory forever. His wife's eyes watching me, her smirk curling at the corner of her lips, made it worse. She was not only a witness, but also a judge, silently approving of my humiliation. It was as if I was an actor in a cruel play, and they were the audience enjoying my fall. As I bent over those shoes, a storm of memories rushed through me. I remembered the times I carried him on my shoulders so his feet never touched the dirt. I remembered the nights I walked miles just to buy him medicine when he was sick. I remembered the day I worked 2 shifts in a row just to afford his school uniform. And yet, here I was, polishing his shoes as if my years of sacrifice were meaningless. The silence in that room was heavy. No words were spoken, but everything was said. My son's silence told me he no longer saw me as his father. His wife's silence told me she saw me as nothing but an old man to be mocked. My own silence told me that my heart was breaking, but I could not let them see it. If I had spoken, if I had cried, they would have laughed harder. So I held my pain inside, burying it where no one could touch it. When I placed the shoes neatly by the door, I expected at least a word of thanks, but none came. My son did not even glance at me. He just picked them up later and wore them as if they had cleaned themselves. His wife passed by me, her perfume filling the air, her smirk still on her face. That silence was worse than any insult. It told me I had become invisible in my own home. That night, I sat alone in my room. My knees still ached. My hands still shook. I looked around at the walls I had built with my own sweat and labor. This was my house, yet I felt like a stranger inside it. I thought of my wife, long gone, and wondered if she could see what had become of me. Would she cry to see the man who once stood strong now reduced to kneeling before his own child? My eyes filled with tears, but I did not let them fall. Even in private, I did not want to give him that victory. Humiliation in silence is heavy because there is no release. No one to hear your cry, no one to wipe your tears, no one to share your pain. I carried it inside, and it burned like fire in my chest. But as the hours passed, that fire began to change. It stopped being only pain. It began to turn into something stronger, a resolve, a decision, a quiet power waiting to be unleashed. Because in that silence, as I sat alone, I remembered something important. The house was mine. The deeds were mine. The property was mine. He may have made me polish his shoes, but the ground he walked on still belonged to me. And in that silence I realized, the man kneeling on the floor still held more power than the man standing tall with pride. Power is a strange thing. My son believed he held it because I was old, because my back was bent, because my hands trembled. He thought power was in his youth, in his voice, in the way he could command me to kneel before him. But he forgot something important. Real power is not always loud. Real power sits quietly in papers, in deeds, in signatures, in the law. And all of those things were still mine. As I sat alone after that cruel night, my shame slowly turned into thought. He had the loud voice, but I had the silent pen. He had the arrogance of youth, but I had the wisdom of years. He had the house to live in, but the land it stood on still carried my name. He thought I was nothing because I obeyed his order to clean his shoes. But while I wiped away dust from leather, I remembered the truth. I was the one who had built the walls around us, the roof above us, the name he carried. Without me, he was nothing. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. He could order me to polish shoes, but he could not order the bank to release $1 without my approval. He could command me to kneel, but he could not command the law to change the will I had written. He could smirk at me in front of his wife, but he could not erase the fact that every corner of that house was still under my control. My son's mistake was simple. He confused cruelty with control. He believed that because I stayed quiet, I was weak. But I was not weak. I was patient. And patience is the strongest weapon an old man can carry. Every cruel act he committed only sharpened my resolve. Every insult he threw only reminded me of the power he had forgotten. I thought back to the many years I spent working for him. The land I bought, the money I saved, the property I secured. All of it was in my name. I had never rushed to transfer it to him because I wanted to see if he would grow into a man of respect, but he did not. And by keeping everything under my name, I had unknowingly protected myself. Now, his arrogance had left him blind to the fact that his future was still resting in my old, trembling hands. His wife, too, believed the same lie. She thought standing behind him while I polished those shoes meant she was above me as well. But she did not know the truth either. She thought the house was theirs. She thought the property was theirs. She thought their laughter proved they had won. But all of it was still mine. Their pride was built on sand, and I had the power to wash it away with one decision. That night, as I lay in my bed, I smiled for the first time in many years. It was not the smile of joy. It was the smile of realization. They thought they had broken me. But in truth, they had reminded me of something I had forgotten. The pen is stronger than the hand that slaps. The law is stronger than the voice that mocks, and silence is stronger than cruelty. I still had power. And soon, I would use it. The night after I cleaned those shoes, I did not sleep. I lay awake in my small room, staring at the ceiling, my mind heavy but clear. I could still hear their laughter, my son's voice sharp with pride, his wife's smirk carved into silence. The sound echoed in my ears again and again, each time cutting deeper. But in that long night, as I lay in the dark, I made a decision that changed everything. I told myself, enough. Enough of the insults, enough of the humiliation, enough of being treated like a servant in the house I built with my own hands. I had given him life. I had given him education. I had given him a home. But what did he give me? Nothing but shame. And shame is not what a father deserves after a lifetime of sacrifice. I thought of my wife, long gone. If she could see me now, kneeling on the floor, polishing shoes while our son laughed, would she cry? Would she look at me with pity? Or would she tell me to stand up and take back the dignity I had lost? I imagined her voice calm but strong, telling me, "Do not let him spit on the years you worked for. Do not let him take from you the one thing you still have, your power." And in that moment, my heart hardened into resolve. I decided my son would not inherit a single stone from me. He would not inherit the house. He would not inherit the land. He would not inherit the name. I decided to erase him, not from my heart, because a father's heart never forgets, but from my legacy. He would not carry forward the fruits of my labor. He would not live in comfort while I lived in humiliation. The decision was not born out of hate. It was born out of justice. A father gives, but a father also protects. And in protecting myself, I was teaching him the lesson he refused to learn. Cruelty has consequences. I decided that strangers who respected me would receive what he took for granted. I decided that charities who helped the poor, neighbors who treated me with kindness, even distant relatives who still showed respect, they would become the true heirs of my work, not him. For years I had stayed silent, believing silence was peace. But silence in the face of cruelty is not peace. It is surrender. That night, I ended my surrender. I decided to rise, not with anger, but with law. Not with fists, but with pen. Not with shouting, but with quiet action. My revenge would not be loud. It would be final. By dawn, the decision was set in stone. My son thought he had broken me, but he had only woken me. And once awake, I could not go back to sleep. I would cut him out. I would take back my dignity. And I would disappear, leaving him to choke on the silence he had forced on me. A decision means nothing without action. And I knew that if I wanted justice, I could not delay. The very next morning, I rose earlier than usual. My son and his wife were still asleep in their room, resting peacefully in the house I had built, the house they believed was theirs. I quietly packed a few papers into a worn folder, dressed in my plain clothes, and walked out of the door. My heart was heavy, but my steps were steady. I went to my lawyer's office. He was an old friend, a man who had known me for many years, a man who understood respect. When I sat across from him, he could see something different in my eyes. I told him everything. I told him about the shoes, about my son's commands, about the humiliation I had suffered in silence. My voice did not shake. I spoke calmly, but each word was sharp like a knife. He listened, nodding slowly, his face growing harder with each detail. When I finished, I told him my decision. "Cut him out," I said. "Erase his name from everything. He is no longer my heir." My lawyer looked at me carefully and then leaned forward. "Are you sure?" he asked. I nodded. My answer was firm. Yes. More sure than I have ever been. Together, we began the work. He pulled out the will, the deeds, the accounts. One by one, my son's name was removed. In its place, new names were written. Charities that helped children, neighbors who had shown me kindness when I was weak, even distant relatives who still called me with respect. Every line I signed felt like a chain breaking, a weight lifting. With each stroke of the pen, I was taking back what was mine and giving it to those who deserved it. The property, the land, the money, all of it was legally transferred. There would be no way for him to challenge it, no loophole, no excuse. The law would stand on my side, not his. By the time the papers were finished, his future was gone. His arrogance, built on the belief that he would one day own it all, had been erased in ink. I left the office lighter than when I had entered. For the first time in years, I felt in control. My lawyer placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "You did the right thing." I nodded silently. Deep down, I knew I had. When I returned home, I carried myself differently. My son noticed it. He asked me where I had been, his tone filled with suspicion. I did not answer. I did not need to. The papers I had signed that morning were already louder than any words I could speak. He still believed he controlled me, but the truth was, his control had ended that day. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about what I had done. Some fathers might feel guilt for cutting out their own blood, but I did not. I had given him every chance. I had given him every sacrifice, and in return, he gave me humiliation. My revenge was not cruel, it was just. The execution was complete. My son still walked the halls of my house, but the truth was he no longer owned even a stone of it. The land beneath his feet belonged to others now. The future he believed was his had been stolen, not by me, but by his own arrogance. I had simply signed the papers that his cruelty had earned. After the papers were signed and the property was gone from his name forever, I knew the final step I had to take. It was not enough to cut him out on paper. I had to cut myself out of his life too. I had to disappear. If I stayed under his roof, he would continue his cruelty. If I remained in that house, I would still be the old man he mocked, even if the property no longer belonged to him. To reclaim my peace, I had to vanish like smoke. I waited a few days, watching him. He still walked with pride, still spoke as though the world was his. He did not yet know the truth. He thought his future was secure. But I smiled quietly because I knew what he did not. Soon the papers would speak and his pride would crumble. But I did not want to be there to see his rage. I did not want another word, another insult, another smirk from him or his wife. I wanted silence. And so I prepared myself to leave. I packed only a small bag, a few clothes, a little money, and some photographs of my wife and me when we were young. I did not need much. The home was not a home anymore. The walls that once gave me comfort now only echoed with humiliation. I looked around one last time at the furniture, the windows, the doors. All of it I had built, all of it I had given, and I thought, let him sit here, believing it is his, until the day he finds out it belongs to strangers. That would be my last gift of silence. Before dawn, I walked out. The sky was still dark, the air cool. The house behind me looked peaceful, but to me it felt like a cage I had finally escaped. I walked slowly, carrying no burden in my heart. For the first time in many years, I felt free. Free from his commands, free from her smirks, free from the humiliation that had chained me. I did not tell anyone where I was going, not my neighbors, not relatives, not even my lawyer. Disappearing means leaving no trace. If he searched for me, he would find nothing. No note, no message, no clue, only silence. And that silence would be louder than any goodbye. I traveled far, to a place where no one knew my name, no one knew my story. I found a small room to rent, simple but clean. I bought my own food, cooked my own meals, ate with dignity at a table where no one mocked me. Each bite tasted better than any feast I had once shared under his roof. Because dignity is the best seasoning, and I had found it again. In the evenings, I would sit by the window, watching the sunset. I thought of my wife and whispered to her in my heart, I have done it. I have taken back what he stole. He will not carry our name into disgrace. Our legacy is safe, and I felt her spirit close to me, as if she was proud. My son did not know where I had gone, but I imagined his face when he finally discovered the property was no longer his, when he learned the deeds had been signed away, when he realized his future had been erased. He would rage, he would shout, he would search, and then he would fall silent, left with nothing but questions. And that silence, my disappearance, would be the answer. Disappearing was not running away. It was freedom. It was the final act of control. By leaving, I showed him that he had no hold over me. By vanishing, I gave him nothing to push, nothing to mock, nothing to order. He was left with his pride and his wife's smirk, but no father to humiliate anymore. Only memories of the man he broke, and the silence of the man who walked away. The fallout began quietly, like a storm that first hides in the clouds before it breaks. At first, my son still believed everything was his. He walked through the house with pride, speaking loudly to his wife, telling her about the future they would build, about the property that would one day be theirs, be worth even more, about the land that would always stay in his name. He laughed, drank, and bragged with his friends. He thought he was the master. But storms always arrive, and soon his sky grew dark. The first sign came from the lawyer. A letter was delivered to the house, sealed and official. My son opened it with confidence, but his face changed when his eyes reached the words. His name was no longer listed as heir. The will was rewritten. The deeds were transferred. The property he thought was his had been given away. I was gone, but my signature remained, cutting through his pride like a blade. His hands shook as he read. His wife asked questions, her voice sharp, but he had no answers. The home they sat in was no longer theirs. Then came the whispers of the neighbors. News travels fast. They spoke quietly, but loud enough for him to hear. The old man gave it all away. The son was cut out. All that property, gone to strangers. Their words were like stones thrown at his pride. The man who once laughed while I bent low now lowered his own head when he walked past them. Respect turned into pity. Pity turned into shame. Inside the house, the silence grew heavy. His wife no longer smirked. She questioned him instead. How could you let this happen? How could you lose everything? Their laughter, once loud, was replaced by arguments that filled the night. He searched for me, calling relatives, asking neighbors, but I had disappeared. His phone filled with unanswered rings. I did not answer. His anger turned into fear, and his fear turned into begging. But the silence he gave me in my humiliation was now the silence I gave him in his downfall. The bank followed next. Without property, without inheritance, without my backing, his accounts began to dry. Bills came. Debts rose. The business I had once supported with my money began to fall apart. He tried to borrow, but no one trusted him now. Everyone knew the truth. He had been cut out. His pride had been built on a lie, and now the lie was gone. His friends disappeared too. The same people who had laughed at his jokes, who had sat at his table, stopped answering his calls. They did not want to sit with a man who had lost everything, who had been humiliated not by strangers, but by his own father. Loneliness began to eat at him, the same way humiliation once ate at me. And then came the desperate calls. My phone lit up again and again. 1 call, 10 calls, 20, 40. His voice, once filled with command, was now filled with desperation. He begged, he pleaded, he asked where I was, he asked why I had done it, but he already knew why. Every call went unanswered. Every silence was justice. The fallout was complete. His wealth was gone. His respect was gone. His friends were gone. His wife's pride was gone. And the father he thought he could control had vanished into the air, leaving him with nothing but shame. He was left empty, his hands trembling, his heart heavy, his pride broken. The son who once ordered me to clean his shoes now sat barefoot in the dust of his own downfall. Justice does not always come with fire or shouting. Sometimes justice arrives in silence, steady, calm, and final. That is how it came to me. I did not raise my hand against my son. I did not shout back when he insulted me. I did not fight him when he ordered me to kneel and clean his shoes. I carried my humiliation quietly, and then I answered it with action. Quiet action, careful action, legal action. And that was enough to turn his pride into dust. As I lived in my small rented room far away, I ate in peace. I cooked my own meals, simple but dignified, and every bite reminded me that I was free. No one mocked me, no one ordered me, no one smirked as I bent low. I walked outside, looked at the sky, and felt light. My heart was not heavy with shame anymore. It was calm, filled with justice. I had done what I needed to do. I thought often of the day he placed those dirty shoes in front of me. I remembered the look in his eyes, the smirk on his wife's face, the sting in my chest as I bent down. But now, that memory no longer burned. It no longer hurt. Instead, it stood as proof of why I did what I did. Without that cruelty, I might never have acted. Without that moment, I might still be living under their insults. That night of humiliation had become the seed of my justice, and justice grew strong. Because now the property was gone from his hands. The land was gone. The inheritance was gone. The future he counted on had vanished. I had given it all to strangers, to charities, to people who respected me. They would carry my name forward with honor, not mockery. They would treat my life's work with dignity, not laughter. My son had thrown away his right to my legacy the moment he made me kneel on the floor. I imagine him still, sitting in the house that is no longer his wife's smirk replaced with anger, his phone filled with unanswered calls. He must wonder where I am, what I am doing, why I will not answer. But the truth is simple. I do not need to answer. The silence is my answer. The papers I signed are my words. The life I chose for myself is my victory. Justice to me was not about hurting him. It was about restoring myself. It was about taking back what I had lost: dignity, respect, peace. And I found all three when I walked away. Some may ask if I regret giving everything to strangers instead of keeping it in the family. My answer is no. Blood is not enough if respect is gone. Legacy is not about bloodlines alone. Legacy is about honor, and honor cannot live in cruelty. I live now with a calm heart. I walk without shame. I eat without fear. I sleep without pain. That is justice. And if there is one lesson I would give to others from my story, it is this: never confuse silence with weakness. Never confuse patience with surrender. Because when an old man finally decides to act, his action can erase everything you thought was yours. Final thought. He ordered me to clean his shoes while his wife smirked. So I gave the property to strangers and disappeared forever.